All right, so science fiction is quite possibly one of my favorite genres, right next to fantasy. A lot of my teenagehood was just spent, just sort of diving into books by, authors like Robert A. Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, amongst others. And yeah, I can say that it has had quite an impact, not only on, what I consume but also on what I produce, in terms of my writing. So yeah, so just jump into it. Um, yeah, so when you think of science fiction, I think when you really just dive into this idea of soft science fiction and hard science fiction, it really shouldn't seem too daunting. If anything, these are just terms that we use to sort of distinguish between fiction that kind of science fiction that puts science in the background with science in the foreground. Now, when you look at sort of franchises like Star Wars, a lot of people like to complain that, well, you know what, they're not scientifically accurate. If we're being entirely honest, they're never really marketed as, films that are supposed to be, scientifically sound. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you were to go and watch, let's say, Star Wars, The Force Awakens, right, and you head in there and you start to hear, sound in space or whatever, you might think to yourself, well, from what I've been told and from, our understanding of science as it is, there's no way that that should be possible. Again, these films aren't really, supposed to be textbook physics lessons. They're really just, meant for entertainment, right? And again, this is something that you also, come across in, films like Back to the Future. Now, this isn't to sort of denigrate soft science fiction in any way, but what it means is that you will sort of be putting science itself in the backseat whilst you put fiction, at the forefront. And so, really, Star Wars is quite frankly a great example of this. Um, and yeah, and I think, again, you shouldn't really look down on soft science fiction and then sort of, regard yourself as an elitist because of hard science fiction. Here I've also put an example of Interstellar. I think it's a great film and it does actually toe the line between the two, I guess the two camps, right? And what do I mean by this? Well, you know, the film itself was, uh, I guess, supported by, a professor who came in and, provided all sorts of research and, all sorts of concepts that are actually backed by the scientific community. However, the film does take liberties, right? So I think that's something we should really think about when we approach films that are regarded as hard science fiction. It doesn't mean that, from start to finish, they follow rules of being within scientifically reasonable, I guess, measures. Really, what it means is there'll be more of, like scientifically plausible stuff than there is fiction, right? So it's not exactly this clean and cut or clean and dry, distinction. And so, you might think of how, at a section in the film, they, enter a black hole. And again, according to our understanding, that isn't exactly something you can do, right? Again, it is it is explained away by ideas of tesseract and so on, which is also a concept that a writer like Robert A. Heinlein did introduce in one of his early short novels. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because science fiction itself does have a speculative nature to it, right? Now, Robert A. Heinlein introduced this idea of the tesseract in one of his books, and in this book, we sort of had this house that was kind of oddly shaped. Um, and the point is that, it was this really crazy concept, and quite frankly, was something that was kind of being, tried and tested in the scientific community. And now, nearly a century later, we see it on film, right? So this whole idea of science fiction being speculative, it sort of says, okay, look, as much as we have a current understanding of science, we can actually, look to the future and again, sort of take a guess and take a dig at what might actually happen. It may not exactly be something that we'll see in the next 10 years, but again, we're really just looking to the future to see, like if maybe the concepts that we're fiddling around with now will actually be something, we'll see on screen or perhaps even in science itself. Another great example of this would be, do androids dream of electric sheep? Of course, this is a bit of a spoiler because it's going to come up later in the presentation, but it does talk about, the idea of replicants. Again, this is a term that's used more so in the films than in the book itself. In the book, they're just referred to as androids. But the point is that, you have human lookalikes, right, that are manufactured by human beings. And again, it really just ties into ideas of, okay, well, if we're going to create sentience, what repercussions might that have? And if we're able to sort of manufacture body parts and so on, like, is that something that, is ethical or, and to be honest, these are ideas or issues that we do grapple with even today. This was also touched on in a book by Margaret Atwood, Oryx and Crake, where she kind of talks about, innovations in manufacturing, body parts and things like that. And so again, we kind of see that speculation in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And yeah, it's even back then it might have been considered more fiction than it is science, but it was based on some scientifically plausible ideas. So yeah, this is really just again a brief overview of soft and hard science fiction. Again, soft science fiction really just adds or puts other elements of the story at the fore, right? So you might think of things like action, which is something that's really again present in the in the Star Wars franchise, right? And then when you look at hard science fiction, again, we're really just dealing with ideas that, really are in line with what we can actually do with our current technology and our understanding of science as it is. So I'm going to continue over here. Now, Have Spacesuit Will Travel is, again, another book that really impacted my teenagehood. And I think what really stood out to me the most was that, there were elements of realism, right? Which is something that a lot of people applaud hard science fiction for. Now, Robert A. Heinlein himself was somebody who served in the military. He was somebody who was also working in the aeronautics field, right? So he had a good understanding of, things like aircraft, spacecraft. He was actually, involved in some of those developments. And so he kind of transferred that skill into his writing, right? And so you might find that a lot of his books do deal with, space travel. They also deal with time travel because he was, quite a devoted mathematician as well. But that's also going to be something I'm going to touch on much later. But anyway, back to Have Spacesuit Will Travel. Now, we need to really consider the time that this book was written, right? As we can see, it was 1958, and it was before we'd actually really sent anybody into space. And so he was sort of writing the story about a boy who decides to construct his own spacesuit, right? Again, it's really something that's hinted at in the title of the book. But the point is that he built this suit, right? But in the building of the suit, it wasn't really just made from material that the writer just decided, okay, you know what? I think this sounds good. I think that sounds, sciencey enough. He really sat down and, used his expertise and his knowledge to really try and ground this book as much as possible. And so the spacesuit that he does come up with is something that may not necessarily have worked in real life, but it was as close as you could get, right? And so that part of the book would be harder, right? In terms of, these camps of hard science fiction and soft science fiction. Where it really kind of gets soft and, I'd say malleable is when, we started, I guess, accompanying the main character as he's, abducted by aliens, and then, he kind of goes on this crazy journey. He goes to a lunar station on the moon, and it sort of just gets, I say, just gets wilder from there. And quite frankly, it really does lose more of those hard grounded concepts and really just ends up becoming very soft, right? And again, this doesn't really take away from the book or any other books in this genre. It really just talks about, the sort of relevancy of scientific accuracy, um, again, between these camps. Uh, so yeah, I'm just going to, yeah, I want to see if I can actually move this around, just so you guys can see everything. I might not be able to see the thumbs up and stuff. Okay, cool. So yeah, so these are a couple of books. I did mention one at the beginning, so apologies for that. But I really would like you as the audience to really sort of just offer your thoughts. So just from a glance, which of these books do you think would belong to the soft science fiction camp and the hard science fiction camp? Feel free to type. Again, if you do type, I won't be able to see it per se. So if one of the call members could just sort of read out any answers that may pop up. Um, Alternatively, you could sort of just unmute yourself and then offer your opinion. But yeah, so the question is, which of these books do you think falls into the soft science fiction camp and the hard science fiction camp?
I would say June is soft, right? I think at least, like from what I've interfaced with it, I think it's a soft fiction. And then Martian is kind of veering more towards hard science fiction.
Right, thank you, Dylan. Yeah, I think that's pretty much spot on. I don't know if there's anyone else who agrees or disagrees. I'll just wait a little while before like voting up on that point. Okay, so yeah, Dune is considered more soft science fiction. Um, that's not to say that it doesn't really deal with topics that, again, were like pertinent to the United States at that time, or even just the world in general. They are like themes and topics that are really really relevant to that specific time period and the developments that were happening. You can really just think of the issue of resources and whatnot. Of course, in the book, it's sort of just changed to this idea of spice, trading spice across the galaxy and so on. Now, where it does kind of get soft is when it touches on these sort of pseudo-religious topics or themes, and if anything, that's more like how do I put this? It's like it becomes more fantastical than it does scientific, if that makes sense. So, it's not like you just have the story of, this main character who has, who's part of a special bloodline, and, he's sort of embarking on this journey. And, we have this, whole idea of him being this, this almost messianic character, right? And so he ends up, receiving visions and, sort of gaining special powers, right? And again, this doesn't really take away from the story. I think it, does add to it, but those are things that may not be consistent with our understanding of, science and so on. So that's where it really just gets soft, like those pseudo-religious elements. And yeah, I mean, you also do have, I guess, I'm sure a lot of you have seen by now, like, giant worms and whatnot. So yeah, that is more, fiction than it is science, right? But again, aliens are usually a huge part of science fiction. The Martian, I really like what Dylan said. He said it's more like towards hard science fiction, right? So what I mean by this is the book itself really touches on, a bunch of subjects, botany, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and so on. And I think it really does a good job of making it accessible to people who may not be like well versed in those subjects, right? And if you are, then it's like a nice little bonus and that kind of thing. But as much as it does, make use of actual calculations and so on, again, we're sort of in this like hypothetical situation if you were on Mars, right? It's not like the writer actually went to Mars or anything, obviously, but again, it's sort of like if he was in that situation, the rules of science still apply, right? And he's able to sort of come up with all these different calculations that Mark Watney, the character in the book, is able to utilize, right? And so that's great. That's hard. But when it comes to sort of the softer side of things, there are I guess, liberties that this book takes, right? And some people do bring that up as a criticism of the book and the film itself, right? By saying that, well, look, you might not be able to have, I don't know, storms above 60 miles per hour on Mars. It's just not possible, right? But for the sake of advancing the plot, because again, the whole point of, this person being stranded on Mars is because, there was a storm that, wiped out, um, I guess, their equipment and everything, and he was left behind whilst his uh, squad mates, managed to make it off the planet, right? Now, as much as that may not be scientifically accurate, right, this whole idea of, like very violent storms, it still advances the plot. So again, this idea that hard science fiction has to be completely hard, like, or nothing else, it really isn't followed by writers per se, because again, you have to really just take these liberties and you might need to even embellish parts of your story. So yeah, that might come at the cost of scientific accuracy, but again, it's really just, you're really trying to, create a story that people will be able to engage in. We did mention this earlier, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It does deal with, hard concepts again. I suppose you could, and maybe this is a bit nitpicky, but you could really just say, well, look, flying cars is a bit of a reach. We don't really have flying cars to this day. But the point is that even if, some parts of, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep or Blade Runner, I'm just going to use Blade Runner from now on because it's a lot shorter. Blade Runner referring to the films. But yeah, anyway, so even though these aspects of the films or the books aren't completely scientifically sound, it doesn't mean that we still can't focus on the other moral and philosophical themes that pop up, that Philip tries to help us explore. So yeah, that's pretty much what I would really be able to say for Blade Runner, or yeah, for now. I really would like to move on to another book that I really enjoyed. It was called Equations. I think it was Tom Goodwin. I could be mistaken, so apologies. But yeah, Cold Equations was another really great, sort of book that I just enjoyed. I think it has been adapted into a film, maybe much longer because the book itself is really short. But you could check that out if you're interested. Now, this book deals with a pilot, right? He's got the space shuttle and he transports material and supplies from one planet, I believe it is Earth, to another, right? And they really have to make sure that when they're supplying material, when they're supplying these, or when they're carrying these things, transporting them, it has to sort of be within very specific, very tight, um, I guess, requirements, right? So let's say the maximum weight is 2 tons. You can't go over that weight, otherwise you won't have enough. I believe it was an issue of fuel or something like that. And also, it, creates difficulties upon entry into, the destination planet. Now, unfortunately, we find out very early on that one of the supply crates has a human being in it, and it's this little girl, and she wants to meet her brother who's posted, on the destination planet. Now, unfortunately, just the extra kilograms of weight that she adds to the space shuttle actually makes it, quite dangerous, for the, I guess, trip to actually, be carried out. It becomes very difficult. And so that's not really ideal because, they're gonna end up dying. Now, it also doesn't help that, this pilot also had to send a very important message to the brother posted on the planet. Now, having said all this, where does the hard science fiction part come into play? Well, again, this book is called Cold Equations. And again, I'm not really sure how accurate it is. I haven't really checked. Of course, I'm no scientist or anything, and I don't really scrutinize books like that. But again, it really is something that's important in this book because they're really just working off of these calculations, right? And they've calculated that they won't be able to make it. Now, at some point in the book, they have to make a huge sacrifice. Of course, I'm probably, spoiling it, but anyway, so yeah, so again, as much as we're dealing with, fictitious situations, right? Where, like we're moving from one planet to the other, even though it's not exactly possible at the time. I think it was written like sometime in the 20th century. But yeah, and it's not really possible even now, like to travel to different galaxies. But again, we really just excuse that for the sake of the book and enjoying the book. So yeah, I'm going to move this around. Again, you might not really need to read all of this. It's sort of just to like guide me along as well, but feel free to read it. Anyway, this is concerning Solaris, right? So it's another film that's adapted from a book, and I really do hope to at least jump into that book one day and just see what it's like. But yeah, I think Solaris is it's a great film. I think it was also adapted I think in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. Now, this book, right, like, or this film really deals with hard science fiction concepts, right? Again, the idea of lunar stations. Lunar stations really just refer to space stations that might, happen to be on the moon or something, right? And that's pretty reasonable. It's pretty uh, plausible, right? We have, had, a bunch of scientists that have said, we could actually build a base, right? Whether or not, you agree with the ethics of that is really a personal matter, but it's something that is dealt with in this book. Now, the main character, Chris, again, sort of finds himself in the situation whereby he's dealing with something that you would call more fiction than it is science, right? There's this manifestation of his consciousness that pops up, and it happens to be his dead wife, right? And she died a bunch of years ago. And just as the audience, he's quite startled by this. He's alarmed, and he doesn't really react well to this, right? It's a part of his past popping up, and it hasn't really been processed. Eventually, he accepts that, okay, look, this is something I'm going to have to deal with, and he quite literally faces his past, right? And it's really just a book that, or it's rather a film that really explores what it means to be human, right? Because now we have this sort of what would I say? Not character, but like something just short of human, right? But if anything, Ari ends up being the most human character out of everyone posted at the station, right? And so we can see that this sort of film focuses more on, the characters themselves and their inner lives, the sort of implications of having to deal with, a manifestation of your consciousness, and that's great, and that really just takes center stage. You don't really forget that they're on a space station, but again, it's not really important that we sort of think to ourselves like, okay, well, how did Ari appear? Like, how did she, how did she just appear out of thin air? Why is it that she can't die? Why is the planet doing this, to the inhabitants of the space station? So that's really what I'd really have to say about this sort of dichotomy between science fiction and soft science fiction and hard science fiction. There's so there's quite a few differences. It's not really like concrete, but yeah. And again, there's also films and books that kind of sit somewhere in the middle. It's not really like this clear and cut thing. So yeah, so in the meantime, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and sort of just ask you guys if you have any science fiction books or films that you really enjoyed, and whether you think that they happen to be more science soft than they are hard. So yeah, if you have any examples, please do bring them up. I'd love to hear them. All right, so I will bring up the writing prompts very shortly, but I see that we have about 3 minutes. Yeah, okay. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the writing prompts in the second part of this session, and then we can just use that time, and then yeah, and then you can just put them in the chat box if you feel, or you can read them out if you'd like. And I think yeah, I think about maybe 10-15 minutes of just writing time would be sufficient. So yeah, in these last 2 minutes, yeah,
I do have a movie that I think is quite an interesting take on science fiction. Well, the movie is pretty crap, but the book was pretty good, I thought, and that's a Ready Player One. So yeah, it's very interesting because it's like it's hard science fiction, but it doesn't seem that way because it's constructed in virtual reality, right? So the hard fiction is that it's a post-apocalyptic society and everyone uses virtual reality as an escape. And I think it's a very interesting dynamic because it shifts between the hard fiction of reality and then soft fiction in this virtual reality. So I think it's a very interesting example of a science fiction book.
yeah, nice. And yeah, I really do apologize that, or rather I feel bad that a lot of people that enjoyed the book, weren't really happy with the film. Again, I think this was something that also happened to, was it, I don't know if I'm butchering the name of the book, but Mortal Machines or something like that. But anyway, yeah, I really do like that. That, like it also, adds, elements of, post-apocalyptic world, which a lot of people do believe that, we're heading towards. And it's not really something that's, out of left field. It's quite frankly a reality that could, happen, especially with the way the world is going. But I do like that, again, it also brings up, matters of virtual reality. If anything, it's great that, virtual reality is being utilized because it's something that has really taken off in like the last 20 years, So again, it's really in line with the technology that we have, which could also, also be like kind of like this hard, that could add to its hard elements. So yeah, it says we have about less than 1 minute. I also did promise to talk about time travel. But yeah, I think I'm just going to end this meeting and then you can just join again using the same link and the same password. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Well, that's pretty cool actually. I quite like that. I do wonder what kind of paradoxes come up with the Tomorrow War, but like that really does sounds really cool. So yeah, again, I think time travel is a really, really fun concept. And I don't know if everyone can see, but Tana has given us an example of the Tomorrow War. I think it might have come out this year, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so with time travel, it's a really, like brilliant concept, right? And you can really just mess around with it in all sorts of different ways. You can have closed loops, you can have, multiple, realities or universes or whatever. And again, that's really fun. And a lot of the time, it isn't exactly based on, again, grounded science. And I don't say this as an authority on, time travel or science fiction in general, but they really do take a lot of liberties, if I may. And this is really great because you really get to push what you can do with science fiction, right? And this isn't something that you can see in more conventional mediums, right? Now, I guess another film that does do this is Terminator, right? And that's considered a classic and whatnot. And again, it's sort of similar to Tomorrow War in the sense that again it's sort of future combatants coming back to the present, the past, and again sort of trying to prevent certain issues from arising. Now, time travel itself is considered soft science fiction, right? But that's not to say that, if you have soft science fiction, then, that's it. Your book is, it's ruined. Time travel just won't work, yada, yada, yada. That's not really the case. I think some of the greatest films to have ever come out, again, dealt with time travel. I mean, you can look at 2001: A Space Odyssey. Again, this is just an opinion of mine. but it is considered, a classic. And I think it is a great film and does, explore topics that, quite, I'd say touching. I don't know if that's the word most people would use, but I thought they were quite touching. And time travel does end up, popping up towards, like the conclusion of the film, right? But if anything, that film is still considered hard science fiction. It's widely, considered this, this film that really is grounded and provides sort of this, vision of what, life on, lunar stations might have been like, you know. And so again, it really just, sort of works off of technology that, they did have at the time, as well as speculative aspects that I did mention earlier, right? So they're really sort of guessing at what we might have, 40 years down the line. Now, of course, all of us have, lived past, 2001, and we can look at the world as it is right now. And, some of those innovations didn't really pan out. We also don't have monoliths just lying around. Maybe we do, I don't know. But the point is that, you know, these advancements may not have, worked out, but they were still a really good guess, right? They were really, really good. And we can still say that, 2001, The Space Odyssey is a hard, science fiction film, right? Another, again, we did mention Interstellar at the beginning of the presentation. It does build upon, some of the elements that we have in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Nolan was somebody who really enjoyed Stanley Kubrick's, take on, space travel and so on. Not reduced to just space travel, but anyway, uh, the point is that, Interstellar does, build upon, some of those themes, and again, it is hard, but becomes softer towards its conclusion, right? Which is a similar trend with, Interstellar's inspiration. So yeah, I did promise, writing prompts. I do hope that I'll be able to share my screen over here. Okay, there we go. So yeah, have fun, guys. Again, my computer is acting up. All right, so I do hope that everyone was able to, make use of the time. Um, okay, cool. I can actually see you already have an entry. Thank you, Tana. Would you like me to read it out, or would you like to read it?
Can I actually like read it out because it might be a bit too long.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I think I chose three. I don't know. I think it was three. Okay, so it goes, all right, ready? Terry asks without waiting for an answer. He opens the door to the ship, and there we are, left breathing only through the tubes tied to our backs. The terrain is dusty, a red clay clinging onto heaps of stone. Perhaps, but then, hey, Terry, take a look at this. Sarah motions towards a bizarre exhibition. Is it art? They ask in unison, staring in disbelief and awe at the artistic talent without its artist. Is it a stone carved in single streaks of abstract lines? They're an oceanic blue, blazing only in lonely color compared to the surrounding red clay. When she turns the stone on its side, a motion waves towards her, almost as if the message were a greeting. But is it? Let me see that, Terry starts, snatching the delicate piece from between her gaze. I think maybe we can communicate with its creator, through art.
Wow, that was fantastic. Yeah, thank you, Tana. That was oh, what I really like is that again, it really built up on the theme of being on this uninhabitable planet, right? And so it's unfamiliar territory for everyone, and you're sort of just going through this terrain. You're not really expecting anything, and then suddenly you stumble across these like these stones or forms of art that clearly have deliberate intention behind them. And I really love that again, like all these characters were really curious, to really find out what it was. And yeah, I really like the idea that, art is something that does communicate to us. Um, and again, the fact that, we regard art as, something that does communicate, a form of dialogue, it's quite interesting that, even these aliens, on this strange planet are also communicating back, that's quite cool. I really like that. And also kind of built this like suspense. So yeah, thank you, Tana. Yeah, I think prompt three was, yeah, we discovered that, wait, yeah, I think it was to do with art. Yeah, your spaceship is landed on an planet. Okay, cool. I'm sorry for those of you who can still see the prompts. I do apologize for that. I know Dylan's still writing. Is there anyone else who'd love to share in the meantime? Okay, so whilst we wait for everyone else, I do have a piece as well. So apologies if I'm staring at my phone. I did type it out. So yeah, I picked the second one, also to do with art. So Jared studied the artistic structure before, easing into the fact that an otherworldly being had rendered some kind of meaning into form. He turned to his colleague and asked, "What do you think they were talking about in this piece?" Mary let her eyes settle on the structure before her. From what she could tell, two life forms were talking. "Do you really want to hear what I have to say, or will my reflections simply serve as an intermission just before yours?" she responded. Jared replied, "I was thinking more of a segue in the manner of all good conversations." "And here I thought you were a narcissist," Mary replied. Jared waited a little while longer before responding and looked over to the other side of the room. "That title belongs to the artist of the group, Michael. The life forms, I believe they call them architects, they agreed to let us in here and even wanted to collaborate with him." "Want to see it?" Mary asked. They walked on over to the other side of the room and admired the piece before them, the first ever collaboration between a human and an architect. Mary pondered for a bit and then concluded that it's like Michael was shouting in this piece, but this architect simply indulged him. This art piece transformed into some sort of dialogue. "I'd like to think they were having a conversation much like ours." "And what sort of conversation is that?" Jared asked. "The type that makes you forget the matter at hand." Jared paused for a bit and studied the artistic structure before easing into the fact that an otherworldly being had rendered some kind of meaning into form. He turned to his colleague and asked, "What do you think they were talking about in this piece?" So yeah, I kind of went with this idea of them, entering this alien kind of museum, and stumbling upon these structures. And again, they're already aware that one of their colleagues, collaborated. But what really kind of trips them out is that, they're kind of stuck in this loop whereby each piece of art that they consume, right, is the same art that their friend Michael had, worked on. So I'm not sure if that was communicated clearly, but yeah. Dylan, I don't know if you're done yet. I'm just going to wait a little while longer. I think we have about 9.
20 seconds.
Okay, cool. Really excited for this one. Yeah. I'm just going to make sure that the other recording went through. Okay, cool.
Okay, so it's very long. But I will start now. Cool. Can you guys hear me fine? Actually, I think I've just missed my mic. Okay, can you hear me fine?
Yeah, we can.
Cool. We thought they would like our art, an insane proposition in hindsight. We really thought our bland brushstrokes, tacky canvases, and unsteady hands could rival the innate beauty they endlessly possessed. Hindsight brings such insanity into focus. We had no way of knowing at the time that our supposedly beautiful palettes would cause near annihilation. Today is the 50th anniversary, or at least I think it is. They stopped bothering with calendars some decades back. There were 4 of us, all eager and nervous. Exploring extraterrestrial life was available only to those who could afford to spend billions on tourist space trips.
But there we were, a bunch of nobodies who had been trained in secret by NASA. We were expendable. If we died in hyperspace, no one would remember our names. Somehow we made it all the way there. We agreed that the first person to set foot on the planet could decide its namesake, if only we made it that far. The second we landed, they were on us. They possessed some electromagnetic pulses in their fingertips. Everything went dark as our connection to the outside world was severed. We were scared and desperate. Believing these would be our last thoughts, we showed them what we came here to do. Placing the canvases against a meter-thick glass, we were standing through adrenaline alone. We had brought Earth's best. The original copy of the Mona Lisa was one of many paintings we pressed against the glass in a futile effort to quell their obvious anger. They looked at them, then fell silent. Hope filled our hearts until we met their eyes, black and red with a smoldering anger. In one fluid movement, they opened our front door, walked towards me, and placed their hand in mine. Suddenly, galaxies flashed through my eyes as my body went rigid. I saw them carving pillars of gods, filling oceans of stars and creating endless green, purple fractals that encircled me endlessly. Then, as soon as it started, it stopped. I was back on my ship, but now it was just me. The door was closed, barred from the outside. As my heartbeat slowed down, the sounds around me came into focus. A slow, rhythmic thudding alarm filled my ears. They had started the launch sequence. I was being sent back, alone. I was a message, one of impotence, a sign that humanity had no idea what was truly out there. I think you muted, Markan.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was just saying that that was an incredible piece. I mean, I feel like I was watching a film, like your use of imagery is really good. And then yeah, like that was chilling throughout. I mean, it really does, sort of emphasize the point that, humanity is not really as great as we usually make ourselves out to be. I think that's really good. And again, like I like the way it flowed in the sense it's like it's almost like a stream of consciousness, like one moment, like we're sort of dealing with the rival on this planet. The next moment, the showcasing, Earth's best pieces of art, and then boom, you're back on, you know, into the ship. And I think that was incredible. So yeah, good use of that. I really do hope that you save that piece and keep working on it. Yeah, thank you guys so much for the pieces so far. Yeah, thank you, Tana. I just saw a message now. I really do appreciate the input. I'm actually quite curious what you guys would regard your work as. Like, do you think your work is soft fiction? Do you think it's hard fiction? Um, yeah, I really would like to hear your thoughts on that. Tana, Dylan, and then also those of you who maybe like you felt you weren't too comfortable sharing just yet, but I really do want you guys to keep thinking about the kind of points that we came across. But yeah, I really am blown away by the pieces. I like that art was especially the popular one, the popular prompt. I think everyone really enjoyed it.
I think science fiction does a very good job at placing like humanity and human ideologies into this fantastical thing. So I don't know, it kind of camouflages like a deeper hidden philosophical message. And I think, yeah, it's one of the easiest ways to do so and most effective. And I think my piece was, I don't know, I think it was hard fiction. But some of it was, I don't know, I guess elements of both.
Awesome. I think some of the best works are here, like a mix of both camps. So yeah, and again, I also do agree that it really does allow us to kind of use it as this kind of like background for us to really tackle like what we're I guess like what humanity really does want to answer. So yeah, again, really blown away by all the prompts today. And yeah, and I should hope that this whole dichotomy of hard science fiction and soft science fiction, really kind of informs your writing from here on out. Again, I did share an excerpt last time when I was talking about psychological thrillers, and it was from Plato, and he talked about how, uh, I think, yeah, towards the end of the excerpt, how an artist might be able to draw the reins of a horse, the saddle, and all of these other interesting parts that we use to control the horse, or whatever. But he may not actually know the form, the weight, the texture, and all that stuff. Those are like intricacies that are lost upon him. And the person, the leather worker who actually does work on these reins, these saddles, and so on, he may not actually know what goes into it. He might not know, the chemical composition of what he's dealing with. But the point is, as writers, right? Because Plato was really just talking about writers, or artists rather. We really do have this privilege to be able to, talk about all these different ideas, or whatever it is that we choose, without really having to worry about, the exact mechanics of how every single thing works. So I do hope that, when you're tackling the stories, you don't feel as though you can't tackle hard science fiction because you don't have a degree in astrophysics or whatever. Again, you can really just use it as a vehicle for your story. And if you want to, deal with soft science fiction, go ahead. It's really up to you. And yeah, and as an artist, I think that's our privilege. So yeah, we do have about a minute left. I don't think there's anything else I could address.